But it's all because you showed them what it would feel like to work with you, no strings attached. And then oftentimes they decide to work with you, but more often than not, they become part of your tribe, which I think is just as important in trying to make everybody my client.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the Struggle to Strength podcast, your source for real life application on how to turn your struggles into strengths in all things mind, muscle, and money.
That was great.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Great dude. Great conversation. I feel like we could have talked to him forever, and we barely even touched on a lot of the things that I did want to touch on. So we'll have to have him back on. But still, I think that was one of the most easy to understand and applicable conversations that we've had around starting a business, creating a content strategy, getting clear on your message and how you want to present it to the world, and building a community that can actually get you the leads, the clients, and help the people that you want to help. Like, I don't know if we've had another episode with as clear-cut action items as this one was. This was great.
Yeah. I think like if you're trying to start a business or freelancing or work for yourself at all from scratch, this is kind of like a pretty good playbook for how to start that off in the right way and like grow a successful business using like local community and focusing on your values around like creating content. It's like pretty huge.
Yeah. Even if you just want to get better at creating content, like if you don't have any plans to, start a business from it, but you want to be able to help people and show up as your most genuine, authentic self, like there's some really good insight in here as to how you can get clear on what that is and how you do present so that you don't freeze when someone says pose for the camera, but rather you can reflect back on who you are, how you operate, and put that into action in a really concise way. So this was super helpful for me. So I hope it will be for you guys too. I took a ton of notes, by the way, which I do often, but I highly recommend if you're listening to this episode, be somewhere where you can take notes or maybe just listen back to it and take notes again when you listen to it a second time around. It will help you immensely, and we'll see y'all inside. I'm excited to dive in. So, all right, let's go short little introduction then to who you are and how you got here. We talked in the beginning of this conversation a little bit how COVID was a catalyst. Can you tell us a little bit about what COVID did to catapult you into your current state of being?
Absolutely. Are we rolling?
We're rolling, dude.
We're podcasting right now.
We just hit it right off the bat, man.
Dude, it's mid-conversation. I love it. I would just first want to start and say, like, you could be interviewing anybody. You guys both kick ass. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm excited to be here. We can go in deep into the story or as deep into the actual strategy and tactics as you guys want. But the one sentence version is COVID hit. I was furloughed from a sales executive role, and in just over a year, I replaced that income as an entrepreneur the very first time I went all in as an entrepreneur. And I don't make a statement like that to impress or to brag. It's simply to press upon the point that in the middle of difficulty, there is opportunity. And I feel like I got lucky, but I also did a couple things right. So I'm humbled to be here and humbled to tell that story.
Dude, I love it. And it's really interesting because we were talking about how that happened to a lot of people. I think a lot of people, when COVID hit, they had these things in the back of their mind where they're like, oh man, I'm not fully fulfilled at my current work environment. And if I just had a little bit more time or this or that, or whatever XYZ excuse it was, this happened to literally all three of us on this show right now when COVID hit. And we were like, all right, we can't do our normal job the way we normally do it. Now we have all this time. Let's make good use of it. And all three of us came out in a really good position. So I think there's a lot of people who are listening to this podcast right now who did the same thing or who are thinking about doing the same thing. And you don't need a worldwide pandemic to change your life right now. You don't need something bad to happen or to create struggle for you to become a stronger person and start learning and taking advantage of the opportunities that you have today. So even though we used COVID as sort of like a catalyst to get to where we are, you can just decide to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about how you made that happen. Like, because that's a big feat in just over a year, replacing your entire income. I mean, the majority of entrepreneurial ventures fail, and yet you made your first one successful. What were some of the most important things you learned that helped you accomplish that along the way?
Yeah, you got it. And I want to preface, I'm slightly ashamed that COVID was required in my story to make
Same.
a move, because if I were to look at the first 6 months of the pandemic, I was doing two categories in excess. Never had I spent more time outside. I was binging on podcasts. I was hiking. I was, scaling summits, mountain climbing, all this stuff, having so much fun. And I was binge drinking to a higher level than I ever have in my entire life. So there's this category of doing all these things that fill me up, and then this category that's draining that glass. Like, there's a hole in my bucket. What happens when there's a hole in the bucket? The hole starts to expand and it starts to drip out. So there's a hole in my bucket. I'm trying to fill myself up. How am I going to fill my own bucket and pour it into other people's cups if I got a freaking crack at the bottom? And I was making that crack larger by drinking myself into a stupor. And a lot of lessons. The pandemic really allowed me to go inward. I started to realize that I was kind of reliving my father's past. He died of alcoholism. In the first 13 years of my life, this is a short part of my story, but I promise there's a reason. The first 13 years of my life, I barely spoke a word. I was a quiet kid. I wanted to be a basketball player, literally had a jersey for every single day of the week, but I was the shortest kid in school. There's a little Asian girl named Olivia Lee that was shorter than me, but other than her, shortest boy, had street skills, but got my ass kicked, was quiet, got bullied. And at a very young age, I didn't realize this until I started to go inward recently. This is something new that I've been realizing. My growth mindset and the chip on my shoulder and my curiosity and my love of learning and liking to help others and put my chips on the little guy came from a massive place of lack when I was younger. So when I was younger and I was getting beat up and bullied and never felt tall enough, I wasn't. Literally growth mindset. I wanted to grow larger, but I wanted to learn. Why am I the quiet kid? Why am I different? Why am I getting picked on? And that love of learning has been a common theme in my entire life. And 5 years ago, if I were to start a business, I would have failed. 10 years ago, I would have failed. For whatever reason, the learning, the skill stacking, the experiences, the going inward, the working my way up the corporate ladder, all of this was preparing me for what just happened to be COVID, which was the time where I took massive action and actually stepped forward into doing something that I feel like I was meant to do. But all that stuff in my past was just chapters, lessons that prepared me. And it goes back to what you just said, ultimately, Josh. Like, we don't have to wait for a COVID. Our life has been preparing us the entire time. I just got, I guess, fortunate enough that COVID happened at a time where I needed a change up, and the furlough and the unemployment, and then honestly, the check that the government was writing me, which I used to get an LLC, that I used to create my website. I stacked all this and just happened to do a good job. So it's not rocket science, but people tell me not to say I got lucky. I feel like I got lucky, but I was prepared for that kind of luck.
Well, you made your own luck.
Yeah.
Being lucky is just being prepared. Right?
Yeah.
To an extent, the more prepared you are, the luckier you're going to get. And
just like note, and I don't know, kind of like noticing when something is ready and then just like jumping on it. I think that's the hardest part. Like, I think a lot of people that like don't get lucky, they probably like see things coming by them time to time that they should be doing, and they either don't recognize it, or they just are like, oh, that's like they're like afraid to kind of jump in, I guess.
Some people are afraid of success because they don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly.
What's going to need to happen for that to happen.
And your point is really good too, about, because I think that's it's like, especially in this country where there's a lot of just kind of like, I don't know, pressure to be like, to be something, I think that's a really good point. Like, a lot of people, they look back and they're like, well, I've just been like working these jobs with no point. Like I've wasted all this time. And it's like and it's like I think a lot of people who like do end up doing something that once they do, they look back and they're like, all those things that seemed like random kind of all came together.
Yeah.
There's an analogy I like that kind of proves that point, and I like to say success and failure. So success is a brick, failure is a brick, and you have a success, you place the brick. You have a failure, you're placing the brick. Every success and failure is a brick in the home that I'm building, the foundation that I'm building. And people like to take their failures and throw that brick through their own window. But realistically, those struggles, those bad times, again, this is optimism. This is gratitude. If we reframe, we start to realize that these are what made us who we are. And we should be grateful for even the worst of failures we've had in our lives.
Yeah. Dude, you don't learn things from winning all the time. No one gets better from winning all the time.
It's boring to win all the time.
Dude, it is. Like winning's great, don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah.
But in terms of the ability to teach you something powerful, useful, that you can actually use to take action and become better, dude, there's no better teacher than failure. So you build your brick house, dude, 90% of those bricks are probably from failures. They're probably from screwing up. And like learning. It doesn't
matter if it's a failure or a success, it's still a brick. It's
still a brick.
The exact same thing. Yeah.
Or in between.
I like that.
If it's just nothing, it's still, you know what I mean?
It was okay, but it's still a brick.
Just like you don't even notice it. It's like that's still something too.
Yeah.
I'm super curious, like step one, like how did you know what you wanted to do? That's the number one thing that always holds me back. I know that's like that. Yeah. That's what holds me. Like, I'm not afraid. I'm not like afraid to like do anything ever. It's just, sometimes a lot of time I just have no fucking idea what to do.
Yeah. So I think that our what is never going to be perfect and our business plan is going to change very quickly. Yeah. My what was a broad stroke was I wanted to work for myself. I've always been a rebel, a pot smoker, didn't listen to my parents. Like I was a rebellious person and I wasn't made for corporate. I wanted to work for myself. I remember one specific moment where I'm literally, this is one moment, but this happened 50 times. I'm staring at like a empty handle of Jim Beam whiskey. And I look up at my laptop and I'm like, wait a second. Why am I marketing online for somebody else? Why can't I just do it for myself? And I don't know, I was in a haze. I was frustrated in myself, but I realized I was following someone else's what my entire life. I was doing what everyone else told me I should do, and I wasn't doing what was actually lighting me up. And I had just a couple of weeks prior gotten on LinkedIn because I knew that at one point LinkedIn was a fantastic job board. I had never used it as a social media platform. But the first thing I had done, so step 0 was I had already set up a LinkedIn profile, and I started to realize that people were like posting. It was like a social media platform. The next step was, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get an LLC. I didn't even know I didn't need an LLC to freelance, but I went and got one anyways. And we don't have to go into my entire podcasting journey, but I had a music podcast I had been running since 2016. So I understood the value of podcasting as a medium. So once I had my LinkedIn and I had my LLC and I didn't have any clients, I was like, how do I connect? My previous role was video production nationwide. No wonder I got furloughed. There was no travel. There was no in-person. There was no video. But none of my clients were local. And I'm from Rochester, New York. Most of my connections were Texas, California, Minnesota, Wisconsin. So I'm like, okay, I'm a tiny little minnow in a sea of sameness. Where do I start? And the most obvious answer to me, and everyone says find your niche, the most obvious answer to me was my hometown. Like, why start in this big international, like I'm a minnow right now. Let's start in my hometown. So Rochester, New York, business podcast. When you get that hyper niche, how difficult do you think it was to become the largest Rochester, New York business podcast rather quickly?
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. It actually wasn't that difficult. And we can get into as minutia as you want, but as I networked, met people, provided value to the community, built out my LinkedIn profile, connected, made introductions, brought on one client, that client became 3, that became 5, that became 4, that became 6. It was by building a little bit of reputation and clout locally, by building a social network locally. It was a foundation to build my business on. And now I'm humbled to say that I'm building out more of a national and international audience. But it all started with little rinky dinky Rochester, New York. And I say that jokingly because I freaking love it here. But we're nothing compared to the possibilities in this massive, beautiful world. So,
And so what is your business, and what do you do for your clients?
yeah, so that oh man, you guys can tell I'm not concise, so I'll give you the concise version. I joke, I ask questions for a living. There's two categories. There's the Balbert Marketing's a marketing firm where it's all about asking questions to find the right online marketing solutions based on their specific problem. And that's the typical stuff: websites, SEO, social medias, and partnerships for places where I'm weak and I need a specialist. The other category is Real Business Connections Network, where I have 5 different podcasts. It's all about asking questions like you guys do great, finding incredible answers, getting the knowledge from the people who have it to the people who need it. And we do some production and marketing for podcasters to kind of just replicate what I did for myself for them. So whether it's the traditional online marketing or the podcasting space, again, it's all about curiosity and solving complex problems, which can actually kind of be kind of fun as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's like,
I like that.
yeah, that's really smart, because I think a lot of people are, so you basically have kind of like a marketing consulting agency type of thing. And then for building your community and lead generation, you've got like a podcast and then like social media. And then you started super niche, super local, and grew. And that's like a really good point, because I think a lot of people, they think like let's take me, for example. Like I have a video production company. They're like, well, I'm not going to do that because like I can't compete with people in LA. It's like, why do you need to do that? You know, like that, like that's not really, there's, like smaller areas, Rochester, for instance, like there might not be any other videographers there, but like everybody there needs those services. Maybe, there probably is, but there's going to be, you don't necessarily have to go to like New York or LA or try to like compete in that arena. You can just focus on like where you are locally. And a lot of the times with kind of like freelancing or these like agencies, the kind of like smaller local places, like those people don't have really access to anyone good. And you can be that person easier than, going to LA and being like, I got to work for 2 years for free to even get clients. It's just like, why do that?
I know this is kind of a sidestep, but I want to kind of put an exclamation point on that. There might be other videographers, but there's only one you.
Right.
And that's kind of soft, but because there's only one you, why are you different? And the podcast is just an example, but it's better to be different than slightly better, because I was the only marketing firm that had a local business podcast. Let's be transparent. It was easy to get in the door with target clients of mine and network in the right communities during a pandemic in a virtual world. There's other marketing firms. Again, if I'm a minnow, even in Rochester, I'm still like pretty darn small. Like I'm nothing. There's other marketers, but what makes me different? It was the podcasting strategy, which allowed me to make these connections. So just goes back like, how are we different? And good place to start is you're different. Like you got a different fingerprint. We all got a different fingerprint. We're different humans, we got something special. We just got to figure out what that is.
Yeah. When you started your podcast initially, and it was, did you title it based on where you were geographically and then based on where you wanted to expand to? For example, like was it called Rochester Business Networking Podcast, and then did you go to maybe like New England Business Networking Podcast? Is that kind of how you did it? Because I feel like some people are also afraid to like change things. They're like, oh, well, this is how I started. This is what I called it. That's what it has to be now.
You just hit a few different things, even kind of on accident. So Rochester Business Networking Podcast, like I had a bunch of ideas. I was basically pitching and asking people to come on the show before I even have a title for it. And I think that was one of the possible titles. The reason I ended up choosing Rochester Business Connections was I was focusing on LinkedIn because I'm a B2B marketer.
Mhm.
And on LinkedIn, when you send a friend request, it's actually called a
Connection.
connection. And we're in a state of disconnection with the pandemic. So connection seemed like a great word because it was a common narrative that people would easily connect to.
Mhm.
I own over 10 domain names for every large city. I own Los Angeles Business Connections. I own Austin Business Connections. I own New York City Business Connections. Because I had two thoughts. One, I want to show the world that you can do this anywhere, even if you don't know anyone. Best case scenario, you're like a college student and you're just like dumb and stupid. And you're like, hey, I want to meet people and get to know the town. People are going to give you their time, especially if a cool vision like a connection. So one thought was, let's make a course and like show that you can do this anywhere. And I bought up all the domain names, and that was a big thing. I was like, this is something that isn't just Rochester based. This is just, it's as simple as saying, start a local community business podcast based around the people you want to meet, whether that's learning from them and or possible clients, and just start a community based podcast anywhere in the world. And I guarantee you'll be way more successful than you imagined you'd be. Because again, let's say you're in a brand new city, you've never been there before you know it, people are buying you beers, you're having coffee meetings, you're joining networking groups. I was asked to be part of leadership teams. It's all because you started a podcast. It's really that simple. And I want to just add one tiny little thing. It doesn't have to be a podcast. It can be putting on events. It can be a Facebook group. It can be a community of all different sorts. The key though is start something different. Instead of trying to find your way onto the table and try to work your way up to earn a seat at the table, I recommend you just bring your own table. If you want an opportunity on the mic, just bring your own mic. Start your own thing,
Mhm.
and you very easily can get people you want at that table, but it's your table rather than someone else's. Is that too abstract? I'm kind of all over the place today.
No,
No, that's
no, that was great.
Yeah.
And really helpful. And now I'm starting to think of this. I'm glad you went in that direction, because I'm starting to think of this outside of just the podcasting space. Like, I do have a Facebook group for my community. It's called Muscle Building Secrets on Facebook. And what we're always trying to do is kind of what you talk about, is be able to leverage our community for enhanced influence, to be able to help more people. And initially this conversation, I was expecting to just be about podcasts, but you're right, it is much broader than that. So now that we've brought our own mic and we've got a seat at our own table, like we're taking matters into our own hands, how do we continue to leverage our podcast, our Facebook group, our community, whatever it is, for that enhanced influence?
The broad stroke is you have to, you have to over deliver.
Yeah.
That's the key. Because all the strategy and tactics isn't going to replace hard work, grit, intelligence, compassion, empathy, customer service, practicing what you preach. You have to over deliver, because using the podcast is just, again, an example. When you have someone on your show, everything from the conversation you guys get to have together, to the production you do, to the social media, to that maybe providing referrals. I like to call them nominations. I ask people for nominations. I see if there's any other podcasts I'd be a good fit for. All of that is business-like. There's no monetary exchange, but what you're doing as the person who brought the table, again, give you a different example. As you host an event, you want that event to be kick-ass, and you might even break even or lose money on it, but you want to make sure every single attendee has the greatest time ever. Because what you're doing is you're giving them a business-like experience. For free, you're showing them what it would feel like to work with you if they spent their money with you. So you're doing it for free, but you're showing them what it would be like to work with you. And a lot of those people end up not being your clients, but they can be your cheerleaders. They're referral partners. They're people that leave you a testimony or a review. They're the people that show up when you have an ask. When, God forbid, someone gets hurt or someone's sick or there's a charity event and you need to rally the troops, those are the people that are going to help you rally the troops so you can knock it out of the park on whatever call to action you have. But it's all because you showed them what it would feel like to work with you, no strings attached. And then oftentimes they decide to work with you, but more often than not, they become part of your tribe, which I think is just as important than trying to make everybody my client. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, it comes down to the people that are in your community. It's if you're just trying to help people, then people will come to you for help. It seems simple, right? But
reciprocation.
Yeah, I like the reframe, the mindset shift. It makes a big difference. I think a lot of times we get caught up in trying to attract a certain person or trying to reach a certain target audience, rather than just trying to put out information that can truly help people. And I know I do, and I know a lot of others do, struggle with creating content that does that, because you're thinking about, how am I supposed to show? It's almost like when someone wants to take a picture of you, they're like, pose for the camera. You're like, how do I do that? Like, how do I normally hold my body? How do I normally talk to people? How do I like put what I'm going to say into words that sound like who I'm? It can be challenging. So when we're coming up with content and we're putting things out, what is your strategy around that? Like, how do you sort of create your content story in ways that are genuine, that are truly who you are, and that people can relate to, and that doesn't come off as, hey, I just want you as my client, I want you as my client, but rather, here's something that I can do to help you. And if you want more help, then I have more help to give.
So the answer is simple, but it makes me really upset. So I'll give you the answer beyond the answer.
I love it.
Good. The answer is to be yourself. And it's cheesy as hell. And I don't like it because I'd always be like, what does that even mean to be myself?
Yeah.
That doesn't really get down to the nitty gritty of things. So what I recommend people do, and this is what I did, is it's as simple as a Google. I don't have a perfect list to send anybody. It's as simple as a Google search. Just Google search long list of values. And if you can't rattle off your top 2, 3, 5 values off the top of your head, there's a gap that we need to fill here. So you do a long list of values. First round, just whatever kind of sticks out to you. Like, don't be judgy. Highlight anything that sticks out to you. Round 2, realize that, okay, I want to have like 5 maximum, because let's be realistic. Core values isn't every value. Like when people say I like all music, well, you have preferences, right? So top 5 values, so start crossing them out. Then when you have a smaller list, you ask yourself this one simple question. Well, let me actually break it down a little bit. My one of my mentors, Rene Rodriguez, breaks it down really, really well. He talks about 2 stories. A lighthouse story is a mentor, a hero's journey, saving grace that basically grabs you by the hand and shows you what it means to embody a certain value. That's a lighthouse story. A foghorn story is the polar opposite. It's someone who didn't embody a value, maybe made you feel less than, and their effect on you made you, whether you knew it or not, it was your mission. You had chips on your shoulder to be the opposite of what they did for you. You wanted, and foghorn stories are way more compelling because we've all had those dark moments in our life. But think about someone who positively instilled values or someone who lacked a value. And when you look at your ages, like 8 to 13, that's when most of our brain and our understanding of how we're going to live in this world is starting to develop. Like our 8 to 13-year-old self defines a lot of who we're going to be. And when you look at those stories, where do you have lighthouse or foghorn stories? And tell those. And it's going to be difficult. But when someone says, why do you do what, why is connection so important to you? It's as simple as me saying, I didn't speak the first 13 years of my life. I felt disconnected. I had an alcoholic father, and I never wanted anyone to feel that way that I felt when I was a young kid. That's why connection's important to me. So then you start creating content around those values. You don't have to tell every single story. You can use case studies, but basically once you understand your values, just talk about them. And it doesn't have to be like, hey, today I'm going to talk about growth mindset. Tell a story that embodies what a growth mindset means. But then you have theme, and you're going to, whether you realize it or not, whether you know it or not, you're going to be magnetic to the people that have similar values to you. And you're going to detract people that don't understand where you're coming from. And then the tribe builds itself, and it's authentic and organic rather than, again, you're being yourself, but this is how you be yourself. You basically just speak your truth, tell your truth, and find other people that resonate with that.
Dude, that might be the simplest in concept, but the most important exercise that anybody can do. And also touches on why it's so important to go inward. Like we feel and we act like we know this way about ourselves. That might actually be the most important exercise that anybody's ever mentioned to do on this podcast ever. But we feel like we know ourselves. We feel like we know who we are, but we haven't actually put pen to paper. And while you were explaining how to do that, I was taking notes. I was writing it down. I did a Google search. James Clear from Atomic Habits has a core values list.
There you go.
And they're phenomenal core values. A lot of them were taken from a list that he received while working with the Leadership Institute. And so you can do this right now. I have it up on my Word document, and it's something that I'm going to do because it's going to help me with my content. But this also speaks to the importance of going inward that you mentioned earlier on this episode. Is if you don't have a strong foundation of who you are, how you operate, why you operate that way, what you value, then you're never going to be able to connect authentically with people. And every time someone says pose for the camera, you're going to have to think of, how do I pose? How do I stand? How do I hold myself? But if you do this exercise, then you can run through that a lot faster, and you can show up more genuine and more authentic. That was awesome. That was very helpful. I appreciate that.
Hey, and again, Foghorn and Lighthouse and the why stories is all Rene Rodriguez. Amplify Your Influence. He's a brilliant speaker for a business context. He's tremendously busy, but if he'll come on, we'll get him on. But Rene Rodriguez, Amplify Your Influences. He's a big mentor who taught me this kind of stuff.
I love it. We're going to put all these in the show notes too. So y'all, to the listeners, I know you're probably taking notes. I feel like a lot of our listeners do take notes because I take notes a ton during these episodes. But we'll put these in the
same, yeah.
In the show notes as well, so y'all have access to them. That's an incredibly powerful story and exercise. So I'm really excited to continue to work on that as well. Travis, have you done any of that? Or go ahead. What are you gonna say?
Not really. Not to the extent that like I should. I think that's
yeah.
Like I've thought about it, but I've never done like an exercise. You know what I mean? And it's like once you do something like that, it's always like, fuck, why did I not do this earlier?
Yeah, I did it with I feel like everybody should do this with their business as well. So like you have your core values as a human, and then you have your core values with a business. And I remember when we did our core values for the business or our core tenets, it was like instantly everything we did in our operation was like geared towards those. And if we felt uncertain of the direction that we wanted to head in, or how we wanted to proceed, or how we wanted to handle a situation, it's like, all right, what do the core values say?
Yeah.
Like it really, especially for those of us who suffer from anxiety, ADD, ADHD, whatever, like our brains can go in such crazy directions, and you can have a hard time quieting the noise. That at least gives you some structure, and it was super helpful. So
I can't remember.
I need to do it for myself.
I can't remember what book it was, but I was just listening to this book, and they talked about this exact thing with like Southwest Airlines. And the example they use is like one of the executives came to the CEO and was like, we think we'd make more money if we offered like this free snack or whatever it is. You know what I mean? And the CEO was like, what's our core value? And some people like didn't even know. One person was like, the cheapest or the most cost effective airline. He's like, is that going to help us be the most cost effective airline? And they're like, well, no, we'd have to raise prices by X amount, whatever. He's like, then no, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like having that hyper focus on like, what are you? And like that I think is crucial. Cause if you don't, then yeah, it's just like day to day, you're kind of like different. Everybody's like different people, like, different, like you're like, you get off a vacation, you come back, you're like, what do I even do? Like having things to like ground you whenever you have those questions of what do I do is huge. And again, something I haven't really done enough. I've done like some exercises here and there with different types of things, but this is a really good one.
Yeah. You made a good point there that so when let's say you go on vacation, you come back, you're like, what do I do? I feel like most of my life and a lot of our lives, we just do whatever we feel like society told us we should do. And when we better understand who we are, it's very easy to make a decision as to what do I do? Let's just do something that's in alignment with who I am and what I value. We can have fun with this. And it's big for business. You guys are making good points. So I don't know this for a fact, but I'm just going to guess. Planet Fitness. What do you think one of their core values is? Planet Fitness.
Dude, I don't know. I feel like their whole structure is based on, to me, their whole structure is based on providing really low cost and quote unquote, non-judgmental, like safe space for people to work out. But it's also built on the idea that it's cheap enough where people won't worry about, like, it won't be the first expense that they cut.
Yeah.
They probably have their percentage of members that utilize Planet Fitness is probably so low.
That's why they're so profitable. It's because they sell like 10 times as many memberships as they could actually, like, if everybody went to the gym every day, they would have to build more gyms basically.
Yeah.
But like a huge percentage so I don't know. What are their like core,
one's got to be around like a safe space.
And so I'm not a Planet Fitness expert, but as you guys said, they want a certain kind of people. And I feel like their core value, at least one of them, is belonging. And they want their people to belong. And when you take that lens as a gym, that's going to attract a different kind of fitness aficionado in a different environment than, let's say, CrossFit. And this is just a guess, but I feel like one of the core values at CrossFit is wisdom. And that's kind of a different than some people might think, but it's getting to know the body. It's looking at it from a science-based perspective. It's looking at it in a formula-based perspective. When you're looking at something through the lens of wisdom, you want the perfect playbook. When you're looking at a sense of belonging, it doesn't really matter if you have the perfect playbook. You want people to come in and build a community together. And when you start from a different value, you end up with a completely different product and service, even in the exact same industry as one another.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. And it makes a lot of sense. And I think about that even in the gym that I go to, and we talk about this, having a sense of community and feeling like you belong somewhere. It is important. And it does vary from gym to gym. My gym, people from Planet Fitness don't come to. Bodybuilders, powerlifters, people who are serious about their health and fitness, people who want to talk about things with other members, how they're doing movements, why they're doing movements. Like we're obsessed, and we're around other people who feel the same way that we do. So I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle to get clear on from both an individual and as your business and the way you want to show up in the world, is to get really clear on those values. So I have another exercise for myself to do this week and this weekend, and I'm really excited to do it. And I think it's going to help a lot in my content. Ben, I feel like we could continue this conversation forever and still not get tired of learning from you. And so I want to continue to do so. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I'm going to want to keep learning. I know our listeners are going to as well. Where can we find you? What do you have going on? Give yourself the plug, man.
Yeah. And first off, I'll make sure you guys have my cell phone number. The moment someone drops out, give me a call. I'd love to come back if you'll have me, because I feel like I could talk to you guys for 5 hours straight. And a plug for y'all. So do this while I'm talking, like in the show notes, wherever you're listening to this, click a thumbs up, click 5 stars, leave a comment, leave a review, do it while I'm rambling here, because it's so darn easy. It takes you 15 to 30 seconds, and it allows more people to see the show, and it allows these gentlemen to know that you're listening. So do that right now. And when you've done that, you can find me wherever you found this. So whatever platform you're using, whether it's YouTube, a podcast platform, or even on the website, use Google. Just type in Real Business Connections. My podcast network is the Real Business Connections Network. So if you type in Real Business Connections, wherever the heck you are right now, hopefully you find me. And if you don't, somehow find me and let me know, because I'm not doing my job as a marketer. But just type in Real Business Connections and I'll be here.
Nice. I love it. And we'll make it easy for y'all. We'll put everything in the show notes. And right back at you, man. Like, to our listeners, go check out Ben, check out his podcast. If you learned something from this one, if anything from this episode was helpful to you, then I'm sure Ben has a plethora of other information that would continue to help you as well. So Ben, thank you again for coming on and sharing your expertise and connecting with us and doing what you do best. It's been phenomenal. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of the Struggle to Strength podcast. We will see y'all next week.